Bert! Get him! Yeah! Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. Okay, I gotta apologize. I gotta apologize to my friends at the American Field Sportsman's Journal. Okay, I had Chris Egram on here back in February, and they're kind enough in their first issue. They're going to have a great ad in there for us. I think it's going to be a one-page ad for the Upland Institute, and I should be telling you people that you, the listener, this isn't anything special. You don't have to be a patron, but if you use the code Hunting Dog Podcast, all one word, capital letters, you get 20% off a 1-year subscription and 30% off a 2-year subscription. So that's not bad. And I apologize, Chris and Todd and all the other people there at UKC that I haven't talked to, that it's not up on my whiteboard. So I'm opening. That's my opener this time. So you can listen to that episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. But it's a great magazine. They sent me a preview copy of what it's going to look like, and the stories are not like your regular stories. It's not a how-to. It's a little more lyrical. It's a little more informative, and it covers every aspect of dogs, whether it's the hounds, the straight field trial dogs, or the everyday dogs, the mutt dogs that so many of us hunt with in our lives and own and love. It's going to be a great journey. So join me with the American Field Journal, and you can get 20% off your first year or 30% off a 2-year subscription with Hunting Dog Podcast, all caps. There. Now, the title sponsor of this show, well, they'll give you 20% off. I mean, anytime by using a promo code HDP20. I probably don't even need to tell you the title name of this. I don't, do I? You're all going, Ron, I'm going to hit the skip button. If you keep babbling like this, the title sponsor of this show and everything we do outside is OnX Hunt, period, right? The title gun dog, the title dog kennel in this country. Put it this way, if OnX made a dog kennel, Gunner Kennels would be in trouble. But thank goodness that's a digital thing, and they're not going to go out and try to make the world's best kennel because it's already been made by Gunner Kennels. And, well, it's kind of like Garmin, too. Like, there is nobody even close to Garmin. Nobody. I don't care where I go. I see a few other transmitters. I do. I will admit that. But I'll bet you it's about 1 in 10 that I see that aren't Garmin, around a dog's neck, around someone's wrist, around their neck. I mean, it's that one word, Garmin, And when you want your Garmin, when you're looking for your next Garmin, if you like to upgrade or trade in, or if, God forbid, you lost it, you go to W Supply to buy your next Garmin. You can buy a lot of things from W Supply, but that's where you go. That's where you've got a crew of people there that can help you, walk you through anything, help you program it. I mean, they'll literally drive to your house, as long as you live within 5 miles, and help you program your next collar, your 300i or whatever it is. Canine Athlete's there for you and your dog. I came back out to the kennel after dinner to do this intro, and I was going to have a beer. Now, sadly, I don't have any Watermark beer in it. I'm going down tomorrow to Stevensville, Michigan to get another barrel of beer, a barrel of goodness from Watermark and my buddy Justin. But until then, I was going to have a beer. I bought, what did I buy? Oh, I didn't buy it. My daughter brought it over. It was Oberon, that comes out in March all the time. Like, woo-wee. Well, it's okay. But I got it right now. I got a Mango Bango Energy and Recover, or Energy and Focus from Wilderness Athlete, which is part of Canine Athlete, which is who makes the best products for your dogs, whether it's Canine Pro or Hydrate and Recover or New Dog. New Dog would be kind of like Energy and Focus. Yeah. Guess what? Mossberg is all in. Mossberg is all in. In fact, for those of you, well, I shouldn't announce this because I only got invited. So anyway, there's a shoot coming up. If you're put it this way, if you're in West Michigan, there's a shoot coming up. And if you're interested in Mossberg shotguns, we're going to have a bunch of them there. This is for the Michigan NAVHDA chapter, okay? I don't care where you're from. Just come in and say you. Anyway, I'll get you all. You write me at Ron B at the Hunting Dog Podcast. I'll put you in touch. If you've been dabbling about thinking about joining NAVHDA, I still get involved with the chapter level part of this. But there's going to be Mossberg shotguns up the wazoo. I'm not saying they're going to give away any free ones, but I'm going to be shooting my 410. I don't care. Laugh at me all you want. I'm bringing my 410, and that's that. That's all I'm bringing. And I'm loading it with Boss shot shells. That is the beauty about having a podcast. Not only do sponsors sponsor the show, but you get their products. You get their products. My buddies call me Ronnie Free Shit, and I don't blame them. So I'm shooting these are hunting loads, but they're like number 7s. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good load. Or maybe they're 6s. I have to go out and look. Anyway, I'm going to be busting clay targets with my NAVHDA friends using a Mossberg shotgun, shooting Boss shot shells. Tie that in, buddy. And I will be going down to Boss tomorrow when I go down to Watermark Brewery to get my new barrel of beer. All right. I already got my load of Purina Pro Plant. That came in last month. They've been feeding these dogs for almost as long as I've had the podcast. When I say they, Purina. But I've been feeding Purina to my dogs since I moved to Michigan. And I've never looked back, never had a problem. When people go like, oh, I got firmer stools. If your dog doesn't have our house dog, Sandy, in 1968, probably as far back as I can remember, late grade school, he had firm dog stools, and he was eating cornmeal, okay? If your dog's in good shape, got fresh water, clean, gets exercise, don't give him crap off the table, of course they're going to have a solid stool. I love how always people, but in case your dog doesn't, I would go to Canine Athlete and get yourself some Canine Pro, because I've seen that help a little bit. But yeah, Pro Plan, I've got a full crate of that. Walton's, I just had the most delicious steak. Now, I'm not a big game hunter, and my wife loves their steak rub, and she loves sous vide cooking now. And I'm telling you what, I don't know. I always hear about plastics, and I'm like, should I worry about it? Do I got a credit card coming out of my ass? I don't know. But she loves sous vide these steaks, and she marinates them with the Walton's rubs on them. And then, of course, if you know how it works, we use the vacuum sealer. In this case, we're using our Walton's chamber sealer. And we put that in there, and that bag is sous vide. It's for sous vide. I mean, a good sealer bag will work in sous vide. We've got the right bags for it. And she had 2 steaks in there all afternoon, and then she just hits them on the not the griddle, in a pan real quick with somebody, just put a little sear on them. And that Walton's, besides the vacuum sealer, the chamber sealer, that is a godsend. We used it for all of our green beans this year. We used it for my birds. In fact, I got family coming up from Florida, and I gotta take my quail out and figure out a good quail recipe. And of course, I'll be using Walton's. I will be. And of course, I'm wearing marshwear. Actually, it's funny. I'm wearing the same marshwear I was wearing a week ago when I got home from Florida. Now, I've washed it, but I just love this shit. You'll love it too if you give it a try. And if you're a regular listener, HDP15, you get 15% off your first Marsh. I don't know if it's first, maybe it's your second and third, but you will get 15% off an order from Marshwear. Look at their pants, look at their tops, look at their shorts, look at their boxers. That's all I used to wear Tommy Johns, and I still have like a couple of Tommy Johns because those things were made like they were almost like bike shorts. Now I got these unbelievably nice what would you call them, boxer briefs. Oh, they're so nice. I mean, that's the first thing I would do. Go to Marshwear, order your first pair of underwear, save 15%. Waltons, you will save 10% with HTP, promo code HTP10, by the way. And, of course, anybody who gives us discounts, you know where I'm going with this. Patrons get a bigger discount, but you got to be a patron to get it onto the page and get it, okay? Arxis boots, I'm trying to talk Jack into a discount for patrons. I know he doesn't want to do the whole listening audience. I wish he would. I'll talk to him about it. Maybe he will, or maybe it's like some free shipping. But even if that, if you need a rubber boot, which I don't know anybody who hunts in the uplands, at least unless you're in the high desert, okay, that doesn't go through some rubber boots. And don't put those schmuck boots on your feet or what's the other one? I forget what it is. But they're just synthetic polyurethane. They're crap. They're just crap. Jack has imported Arxis boots. Now, Arxis are gum rubber boots designed in Sweden. You know how they make stuff in Europe. It's just always better looking, right? And here's a four-wheel camper story for you. Right down the road from me, well, that's a matter of miles, maybe about 6 miles, there is a Dodge pickup truck, and I've been meaning to pull over and take a picture of it. And in fact, I'll do it tomorrow if it's not raining out when I'm on my way to class. There is an old Dodge pickup, and I mean, this is an old Dodge Ram. So that would be, it still says Ram on it, so that would put it into what, the late 80s, early 90s. So, but it's an old clunker. And on top of that is a four-wheel camper. It looks every bit as old as that truck. I mean, it looks like a matched set of old. I mean, I'm talking 25 years old minimum this truck is. And I'll guarantee you this is probably one of the first four-wheel campers that was ever in the state of Michigan. In fact, I should just call the number on it and get a little four-wheel camper story out of it. Who knows? Maybe that guy's a bird hunter. But I'm going to take a picture of that, and I'll put that up on Instagram because this thing, they've been making these type of campers for 50 years. You're going to see a bunch of them on Instagram lately. You're going to see a bunch of new ones. They're not four-wheel camper. None of them. Not the ones. If it doesn't say four-wheel camper on it, you're not getting what I've got on the back of my truck. All right, there you go. Patreon, watermark. I think I got it all. I had a note, but I'm going to leave that off this week. Anyway, love you guys. Love you girls. Love you patrons more. Love you girl patrons even a little bit more than that. There's only 3 of you, though. Anyway, all right, talk to you soon. Well, I don't know if you enjoyed last week's episode, but I enjoyed doing it. One of the reasons I enjoyed doing it is kind of brings you down memory lane. It was called My Firsts. And from my first bird, my first point, first shotgun I owned, and all the little backstories about it. And I will tell you that, this is an unabashed plug for my Patreon group, okay? For the last year, I've been doing what's called a history of my dogs. I started with the first one, and I'm probably about halfway through now. And I'm telling you, as Patreon listeners, the good, the bad, and the ugly, making fun of my dogs, making fun of myself, making fun of my immaturity, making fun of my lack of understanding and how that blossoms and develops and everything. And I enjoy doing it so much. On the intro to last week's show, I said, it would be good to get questions from you because my buddy Roof has always wanted to interview me because he's known me since we were 5 years old. And one of my listeners, I said this last week too, Josh had the same idea. And I said, Josh, I've got to do it with Roof, but I didn't get it done. But I said, you know what, just for content, send me, and I asked this last week, I said, ask me anything. Now, I'm not going to answer questions about, I would answer questions about my first wife, but I'm not going to answer any questions about my kids or my second wife, which is the real one, I'm not going to, I'd probably talk about high school a little bit or something. But Anyway, I was going to sort out the questions that were relevant to hunting and my background. And, there's some people who've been listening to the show that we're in the 11th year of the show. And, people just come on. They just start getting into podcasts. There's probably some people listening to the show that weren't old enough to hold a gun when I started doing the show. And so I did get some questions, not a gazillion of them, but I sorted through them. The only one I've got in front of me on my screen, now I'm going to read this one to you. The rest of them I just kind of bullet pointed the question so I could kind of streamline it. But this person asked me one thing that I would bet there's another handful of you that aren't familiar with it or don't know the backstory. And his email was, what was it that happened between you and NAVHDA? I know something happened through listening to your podcast and listening to the podcast today. You said we could ask you a question, and I'd really like to know what happened with them, with NAVHDA. Well, what happened was I went out to judge a test in North Dakota. And one of the judges that was with me was somebody I consider a good friend. We don't hang out. We live 900 miles apart. But when we see each other, we have a great time. We always have a great time. And very typically what I've done as I've traveled around the country for dog tests is I get out the microphone and we're sitting at a picnic table or on a tailgate and we kind of do a recap of the day, the highlights, the lowlights, and we just talk about it. And people love those episodes because they feel like they're there, They can picture like, oh, I know what that looks like. Well, I started talking about the first handler of the day and this person's dog and how much it reminded me of Zygon's first NA test. Zygon's first NA test was a shit show. You couldn't have done more things wrong if you tried. If you were a dog with opposable thumbs and you could figure out how to get to the test without your owner and run it by yourself, that's what Zygon would have done. Well, this handler had a dog very much like Zygon. So when I'm telling Zygon stories and we're talking about this dog, I meant this just like when I mean this when I'm on the back of a tailgate talking with my best friend. If it was funny, we're going to talk about it. If it was embarrassing, we're going to talk about it. If it was colossally great, we're going to talk about it, all right? Well, Jeff and I don't know anybody in the NAVHDA organization that would laugh any harder than Jeff. Jeff has one of the best. He should have been a Santa Claus, during Christmas. The guy has a belly laugh. And we start talking about this dog. And what's funny is this dog passed its NA test. My dog that I was referring to did not pass its NA test. But that's okay. That same dog ended up getting its shit together. I got my shit together, and I took that dog all the way to the Invitational. And I was just saying on this, but we were definitely laughing at the day and of this dog. And I said, I can completely understand how this handler feels because I had that dog. I owned that same dog. And people who've been doing this long enough, you know what I'm talking about. It's that dog that just, like, if they had, like I said earlier, if they had thumbs and they could work a car and the brake pedal, they'd go hunt without you. And we kept laughing because we're making analogies about it. Anyway, this person, I hold no responsibility to this handler for what happened between me and NAVHDA. And Jeff, and both Jeff and I and NAVHDA. But some friends of this person started putting some Facebook posts up and kind of telling me and then even direct messaging me that I needed to apologize to this person. And I was kind of like, I don't know about you. We didn't apologize. We either duked it out or we just shook hands and said, let's not do it again. It was, I'm old school. Well, because I'm old. And I got a couple of these direct messages. I'm like, what's going on here? Well, Eventually, this gets word to the NAVDA Executive Council that I hurt this person's feelings and I embarrassed this person. Well, if I did, I did. There's nothing you can't take words back. I was just commiserating with the performance of this dog and how this person felt because I had walked in those shoes 20, 25 years beforehand. And Jeff has done it too. Jeff has bred and trained and tested more dogs than me. Well, anyway, somehow, once NAVDA got wind of all this, there was some contact between this handler and NAVDA. And shortly thereafter, I got this letter. And this letter I pulled out of a pile, okay? Now that I look at the date on this letter, it's going on 4 years old. It's about a 3.5-year-old letter. And it says, "Dear Ron, this letter serves as written notification that you're being dismissed as a NAVDA judge effective immediately. You engaged in a conversation with a fellow judge on the Hunting Dog podcast during which both of you discussed an individual natural ability performance, including the names of the handler and the dog and the handler's employer." They were right. I did. It was not malice. I wasn't trying to put this person in a bad spot or anything else, but that's what I did. That's what I've done on podcast every time I've ever done this after a test. And in this letter, because people are asking about this, I won't go into this much detail with every other question here, but I've never read this to everybody. At least not if you're on a Zoom room, I have, and but not on the general public. And it says, "After each test, we communicate to all handlers that we judged your dog as a team and will be available as a team to answer any questions you may have for a short period of time." 100% factual statement there. We also state that handlers should not ask the judges questions after because that will not be discussed after that because we will not discuss the dog's performance. And what they mean by that is, so after a test, we read the scores and we tell everybody before anybody has a drink or starts filling out their cards or packing up their suitcases, we tell all the handlers, if you have any questions about your score, please come up to us in a group. There was 3 judges that came up with this decision. They come up to us in a group and ask us, like, why did I get this? What does this score mean? And we will answer those questions to the best of our ability using our scorecards. And then it says in here, the judge's handbook also states the following in general comments to the judges. Judges should be cautious about their comments and expressions of personal opinions regarding dogs, breeds clubs, registries, other trialing systems, or people. You're right. We should be cautious about our comments, but we don't have to be shy. We don't have to be, we do talk about these things. We've actually had people ask us like, well, I just went to an AKC test and they said it was so we do talk about this stuff. We just try to talk about it in a very professional level manner. And then it says, handlers who bring their dogs to us for evaluation have typically invested a good deal of time, money, and effort in preparing your dog. 100% true. I know. I've done it. Handlers may appropriately be considered our customers. Yeah, I kind of disagree with that. But in a sense, in an abstract sense, yeah. The handler is a customer of NAVDA, in a sense. They're paying the chapter, but they're usually a member of the chapter. What they're paying for is the price to get the judges in there, their airfare, the meals, the birds, the chuckers, the ducks, the pheasants. That's what they're. But I guess you could call them a customer. And it says, remember that you are an ambassador for NAVDA and the system. I'm going to pause this here because this is an interesting kind of a. I'm going to read it again. Remember that you are an ambassador for NAVDA and the system. Okay. So what is not written in this letter is I started this podcast in 2015. In 2015, which predates this letter by 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, by 6 years, okay? I had brought more people, other than dog breeders, which when you sell a litter of dogs, you give everybody a NAVHDA membership, so dog breeders bring in the most members. I've been talking about NAVHDA and the enjoyment, the challenges, the friends you make for 6 years, because when I started the podcast, I leaned on a lot of NAVHDA people to bring them in and talk and tell stories, and I brought in enough members that I was actually given accolades at annual meetings for the amount of members brought in to NAVHDA from listening to my podcast. So I was given accolades for this. And then the next sentence is, this should be kept in mind at all times. Whether you're a judge, a spectator, or handler, you're always an ambassador for NAVHDA. Well, if you're a spectator, I don't agree with that. You could just be a spectator. If you're a handler, you may be brand new to this whole thing. You're not an ambassador for NAVHDA. Judge, yeah, you're an ambassador for NAVHDA. I agree with that. I agree with 30% of that, 33% of that sentence. So here's to answer the question, what happened? Okay. It says, in addition, it's been communicated by the Judging and Testing Committee in 2 email blasts, as well as 2 judges' workshops, that all judges should be careful what they say and write on social media. And then it says, Ron, you have fallen short of these standards. This decision by the Executive Council in consultation with the Judging and Testing Committee is final and absolute. There will be no appeal implied or granted. There will be no opportunity to return to the judging cadre. That's the letter I got. So that is what happened. I told a real story about a real day, just like I've been doing for 6 years. Just like the same stories that attracted people to NAVHDA. Well, apparently NAVHDA has changed. They have definitely changed. I will tell you that right from firsthand experience when I started to the last day I judged. NAVHDA has changed, and I would say it's not for the better. When I started judging dogs, there was it would be rare for a handler to even come up and ask their questions. Now, they should come up and ask questions if they don't know why they got a 3 here and where they thought it was a 4, why they got a 2 and they thought it was a 3. That's great, right? But we were the face of NAVHDA. That's the people, the handlers that come to a test in North Dakota, Missouri, Iowa, where they never meet the EC. They never go to Arlington Heights. They never go to EC meetings. All they got is our judges. And I had what I would say is an impeccable record of communicating, of judging. But because this person's feelings were hurt, that was the only thing they told me on a Zoom call, that this person's feelings were hurt. And because there's that one sentence in there, you can't talk about a dog's scores after the test, that is built into, so we don't go to a no-host dinner after the test. And then the handler that stood on the side and said, I really don't want to walk up there and talk to the 3 judges and ask them why they gave me a low tracking score. Well, that handler starts feeling comfortable, and we're all out to dinner, and then they come up to you, and they say, I know it's after the test, but why did my dog get to 2? That is exactly why that sentence is in our handbook, in our memos, in our communications, that we don't talk about a dog after the test scores were read, because we don't have our cards in our hands. We're not going to be able to give this person an exact answer, because the answer very often is different on 1 or 2 of the judges of cards. We come to a consensus one judge may not feel that strongly about something, the other two do. So the third judge says, okay, I'll go with you guys. All right, you're right. It's a 2. It's a 2. And so we are always told to never talk about a handler, the score, after, but it's meant to be, we're not supposed to, we give a window of time. So basically, NAVDA took a very lawyered up approach about this, did not want to hurt this person's feelings, did not want this person to quit NAVDA, and they made a decision that it was final and absolute. There will be no appeal implied or granted, and there will be no opportunity to return to the judging cadre, of which I have never considered, which I've never asked them in the past. But I will tell you this, before we go into the regular questions that aren't so deep like this one. I did have a Zoom call with NAVDA about this, and I remember they said, well, Ron, what's your side of the story? I said, I don't have a side of the story. My side of the story was broadcast through an RSS feed to everybody that listens to me. So if you're asking me if I've got a different version of what I said on audio and I was happy to put out there and happy to tell the story about, well, I don't have my side. My side of the story is the podcast. And I asked the executive council, I said, I would like to find out what this handler wrote. Because for all I know, it was not accurate. It could have been. It could have simply said, my feelings were hurt. This was really terrible, and I can't believe it that I would be talked about after a test. Okay? Maybe that's all the letter said. I have no idea. I don't know what the letter said. I'll probably never know what the letter said. I mean, unless I can do a Watergate and break into the offices and get in the file drawers and see what's in the file, I'll never know. And I asked the executive council, I said, based on your letter that there's no appeal implied or granted, wouldn't I have the ability to read this letter that caused you to make this decision? And they said, absolutely not. I mean, this person could have said, did I flatten the tire on their truck and I key scratched it? They could have said, anything. I mean, I'm not saying they said this. I'm not saying they said anything inflammatory or derogatory about me. But what I'm saying is I was not even given the ability to read the letter that was sent to NAVDA that caused them to let Jeff and I go, which I find is really odd because, yes, it's a private club. Yes, it's a small club. There's now 10,000 people. And we're not talking about the government here. We're not talking about even something near as big as the AKC or any big organization, okay? But nowhere in my life, and of course my law degree only comes from watching television, where when someone's on the defense, that they don't their lawyer gets to see the evidence so they know how to prepare a statement. And so to answer your question, in a nutshell, after that 20-minute diatribe, yeah, something happened. I don't know exactly what was written in that letter. I do know the letter I just read to you was sent to me in 2021 and said, no appeal, implied or granted, and no opportunity to return to the judging cadre. Yet I'm a life member of NAVDA. When this opportunity to judge dogs, which is something I really enjoyed, was taken away from me, if for lack of a better word, I had contacted the Federation, and I've known Jeff Funke for years. He was also a NAVDA judge. In fact, everybody pretty much in the Federation was a NAVDA judge. And I just love being in the field, talking to people, meeting their dogs, helping them when I can, judging them the rest of the time, trying to give them a great experience. So to answer your question, that was it. That's what happened. Now, you can take it from there. You can write me follow-up questions if you have, but I think I've read everything that I could, legally. I mean, I have some letters here that other chapters wrote in and came to my defense, but that didn't matter. That last statement, which is funny because that is not the process anymore. Jeff and I were kind of the catalyst for it, but to have something that says final and absolute, no appeal implied or granted, well, that would mean there's no chance of parole, I guess. No chance of acquit. The governor can't acquit you at midnight, so they don't hang you. But anyway, apparently in the end, I broke a rule that I broke dozens of times with the best of interest in telling a story about what happened in a field or what happened in a test day. And this one hurt someone's feelings. That's the only actual words that are not in this letter that I was told on the Zoom room that I hurt this person's feelings. So, I told you, NABD is different. All right, let's get on with the rest of this. Okay, one person wrote, "When and why did you move to Michigan?" And I'm thinking, well, I guess, over the years, you hear me talk about Illinois a little bit and growing up in Chicago, but there's really only been a couple podcasts where that's come up. And I just always had a desire to get out. I had an uncle that lived in Harrisburg, Michigan. Used to go up there in the summertime as a, like a 10, 12, 13-year-old. I loved the woods. I loved the wide open spaces. That's why I hung out in the cemetery in Chicago. Most of if you listen to last week's episode, that's kind of where I learned to do slingshots, bow and arrows, and BB guns. And then I had a friend that I actually hunted with just a little bit. His name was Bill, and he was a millwright with me in Chicago, and he met this girl whose family had a summer cabin up in Twin Lake, Michigan. And in the summer of 1981, or actually in the spring of 1981, I was served divorce papers from my first wife. Now, we were married a whole year. Yeah, a whole year. Like, we were married like 16 months at this point. And a whole nother side story. But to answer the question, why did you move to Michigan? And when did you, why and when? Why was because I got on my motorcycle and I wanted to see my buddy Bill, who knew my first wife really well, or knew enough about her, and I needed somebody to drown my sorrows with. And Bill was a great ear for that. So I got on my Kawasaki 650 and drove to his place in Twin Lake. Now, on a normal drive in a car, that's about 3.5 hours from where I live to Twin Lake. And I think I made it in about 2.5 hours on that Kawasaki 650. I just wanted to get up here. And I remember I had my sleeping bag, my backpack tied to what they call a sissy bar, where your passenger could rest on the second seat of the bike. And I stopped at Dirty Ray's gas station, and I picked up a case. I think it was probably Old Milwaukee is probably what I was drinking back then, maybe Old Milwaukee Light. But I picked up a case of that, put a couple bungee cords around that, got to Bill's house, and we started drinking, and I started whining all about getting divorced. And he had to go to work the next day, and I told him, of course, this was in an alcoholic-induced state. I said, I'm moving to Michigan with you, Bill. He goes, well, Ronnie, I mean, you can't move in here. Bill's got, 2 kids. I said, no, I'm moving to Michigan like you did. And he goes, well, he says, there's a lot of property for sale around here. There's places all around the lake for sale. And he told his wife, he said, drive around tomorrow. I got to go to work a half a day. And drive him around. And I'll never forget, I only went about a mile from his house, and I went down our road, and there wasn't a house on this road for either side of the road. This was just a sand road, no houses on it. And I saw a sign that said Apple Realty, and the sign said $500 down, $50 a month land contract. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Now, not that I knew what land cost, and I was renting an apartment in Chicago, but I thought land was expensive. $500 down and $50 a month. Even this derelict could afford that. So that day, I don't know the day I did it, but it was in the summer of '81, and I came up to Michigan to drown my sorrows and bought my 5 acres. Eventually, long story, my wife and I, my now wife of 40 years, we got the 5 acres, both north and south of my 5 acres that I bought. And so that is when and why I moved to Michigan. I think I covered this, but maybe I didn't. Somebody wrote, what was your first hunting dog? I know last week I talked about my first dog, my favorite dog, which was our house dog as a kid, which kind of sets you on the trajectory of falling in love with dogs. Those times you just sit on the floor and you pet them, and it's like, my God, I mean, what's better than a dog growing up as a kid? But in case I didn't say it last week, this is Shorty. When I got here, I wanted to get a bird dog. And as last week's episode, I told you I had met a guy at the Iroquois County Conservation Area, and his GSP, was the first dog we shot birds over. And I was telling my wife, and my wife was thinking about we should have a dog. We had twin girls, and we had one on the way, and we should have a dog around the house. And she was all for it. They had a dog growing up. And she saw an ad in the Muskegon Chronicle for $40. It said German Shorthair Pointer fixed. And I mean, that didn't raise a flag with me. What that raised a flag was that's in my budget. We weren't shitting in high cotton. And I went over and met these people, and that dog was friendly. Spent many years with that dog, quite a few hunting trips, and but he was a runaway dog. And I think if you're not a patron, and some of this is redundant, if you become a patron, you can listen to the history of my dogs, and I covered a good portion of JD in the first, I think probably, it would have to be my first episode about the history of my dogs. And but his name, we called him JD. That's what they called him, so we called him JD. It was $40. The dog ran away twice for extended periods of times. Once was returned to me by the U.S. Forest Service, found about 7-8 miles from here. He was gone for about 2 weeks. He was alive. He came back. And that was a dog that I found out later on, because we did keep him for a long time, until he ran away for the last time, which we never did find him. That's the dog that taught me that a fixed dog, a neutered dog, can still tie up with a female in heat. That's a whole nother story. All right. So the next question. So another person asked, hey, Ron, how come you never became a dog trainer? Oh, that's choice. Because I've met a lot of dog trainers. And as hard as I worked for a living in the construction industry, I did not want to do something like dog training, which was way more difficult, literally way more pressure put on you. Picture if people were coming to you building a house, and they never even owned a house, and you had to make this house for them. That's what's like getting a dog in for training. Some people get a dog, they have no expectations, they don't know what they want. Oh my God, easy question. The real answer would be maybe also, I had 3 kids, a wife, and a mortgage and insurance to pay. Dog trainers, when I say this, I think it's a blanket statement, of course, because I've met some of the best and elite, if you would call them elite. How about the best known and most successful dog trainers? And almost every one of them has a wife or a husband that can carry their health insurance while they go do what they want to do. That's a fact. There's money in it, but there's very few that turn it into, what the Smiths have done or, a few other people in the industry. So I was smart enough to say I'd rather work with my back in construction for 40 years than to try to eke out a living being a dog trainer. But trust me, I have had the thought of boarding dogs. Now that seems pretty easy. I got the setup for it. Problem is I only got a couple open kennels. That'd be fun. Boarding them and then maybe, teaching one of them to sit. That's about as far as it would go. This person wants to know if I ever hunted outside of the United States. Well, I guess I'd say, yeah, not out of North America, but out of the United States. I hunted Canada 4 different times. Once in New Brunswick, and that was for grouse and woodcock. Once in Ontario for sharp-tailed grouse. This take a whole podcast to do. In fact, someday I'll get Lance and Norm Lick to come on the podcast when I go up north and talk about that trip up to a place that I doubt if it's still around anymore. But it was a huge forest burn area up in Ontario. And they put an ad in like the Michigan Woods and Waters magazine for sharp-tailed grouse. And we're like, don't they live on a prairie? Well, they're also called a firebird, and they will move into burnt areas. So, there are some sharp-tailed grouse. They've been for a long time now up into the finger of the eastern part of the UP. Not a stretch to think there'd be some grasslands like that over in Ontario, but this place was covered up in them. Hardest walking place I've ever been to, and one of the funnest hunts I've ever been to. First time I was in a sauna and jumped into a lake from a sauna. Manitoba twice. Once to go bear hunting, and then when I was bear hunting, I found a spot doing a little scouting around there after I got this bear that was not one you'd brag about. You wouldn't take a picture of it if you shot it today. But I got this bear, so I had a couple days, and I drove around and talked to this owner of this hunting service, talking about duck hunting, and he sent me over to a guy's place and made a trip back there again the next year and went duck hunting up in Manitoba and did a day of rough grouse hunting up there. And it was a good hunt. It wasn't a great hunt, but it was a good hunt. And I that's one I should do a podcast about the few times I've used guide services and the fewer times it's ever worked out. And if the question was formed different, have you ever wanted to hunt outside the United States? Yeah, I've always wanted to go to the UK for the Glorious 12th. For those of you who don't know nothing, that's the opening of red grouse season. And I've always wanted to go out there. I would also go and do one of those pegged hunts that are driven, like the driven pheasant hunts, just for the shooting and the height and the challenge of hitting the bird. But I would like to go rough hunt some red grouse in Scotland or England, northern UK, for sure. This one, I don't know if I've ever covered this. I know I've talked to people about it. Person was, hey Ron, how did you get on Meat Eater? Well, excuse me. A lot of you have met me. A lot of you have known the backstory. So for those of you who don't, Steve Ranella he lived in Twin Lake, Michigan when I moved to Twin Lake, Michigan. So this is 37 years ago, 38 years ago. And after being here for a couple years, I opened up my own company, and I had some T-shirts made up. And I was really creative with the name of the company. We called it Twin Lake Installations. Anyway, I went to City Hall. I think it was to get it wasn't absentee ballot because it was springtime. Might have went up there to pay property taxes or something. And Steve's mom worked at the town hall, and she saw the shirt, and she said, "Excuse me, blah 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 blah. I have some boys that are all, one just getting out of high school and two in college, always looking for summer work, and I never heard of your company." So basically, through good old Chicago type nepotism, somebody asked me if they'd hired their kid, and the kid happened to be Steve and his brother Dan and his brother Matt. Now, Matt never worked for me more than a handful of days over the years, but Steve worked for me for many years. And when he obviously was on his journey from writer to television, the first show he ever did was called The Wild Within, and that was on the Travel Channel. I was also on that on an episode. These were hour-long shows and big productions. But I got on there, and I actually had Artie, my first Bracco, on that show, but it was edited out. There was no plan on having the dog in it, but the dog was on the trip, and so the scenes just don't have her in it. But she was with me. I have some outtake footage of that somewhere somebody gave me where Queenie's in it. But anyway, yeah. So that's how I got on the Meat Eater. Then when Steve, in the early days of Meat Eater, he was looking for people that he knew, places that he knew he could go to. The Wild Within had a budget. The Meat Eater show, they didn't have a budget. Now, it's hard to believe the way they are now, but there really was no budget. I traveled the first two episodes all on my own dime to go out and camp and hunt on camera with Steve. So that's how I got onto the Meat Eater show. His mom asked me if I could hire any of the boys, and the rest, as they say, is a bit of history. How often do you practice shooting? Well, not enough. I will tell you, I think that's something that most of us lack. Like, we really lack enough shooting practice. Like, I got this handful of people I know, and they shoot a lot. And you know what's funny? They're pretty good shots, right? And then I got a bigger handful of friends of mine that I've hunted with and shot with on occasion, or go to a, like a Rough Grouse Society meet. And everybody needs to practice more. I had a really good stint when I lived down in Virginia for about a decade. I would come back to Michigan, but there'd be times when I'd be gone for a month, and on a couple occasions, 2 months without coming home. Well, we made ourselves at home right there in the valley. I had a home right there in the valley, and we made ourselves very comfortable by reloading our own shotgun shells and going to a sporting clays course there. It was called the Flying Rabbit. And we shot probably 3 times a week. We got to know some of the plant personnel. We'd always hit it on a day off, on a Saturday or Sunday, and we'd do a couple, like a Tuesday and a Thursday after work. And I will tell you, it's still different trying to hit a wild bird that it kind of rattles you after you haven't seen one in a while. But there's nothing like practice. So to answer that, how often do you practice shooting? Not enough. Not enough. I tell you what, that spurred me. I think I'm going to get out the old shot maker and make some of my oblong shot again this year, and do a little more shooting. Definitely need to. What? This one is, well, I wrote this, transcribed it from it. Basically, it's saying, what was your favorite hunt? Well, for one, I'm not done hunting. Like I said, I'd like to go to the UK for the glorious 12th. So I can't tell you what my favorite. I can't claim I've had my favorite hunt yet. So I'll reframe the question. What's a hunt that really stands out? Well, I've said this probably many times, from Zoom rooms to podcasts with other people, and probably even interjecting it into my podcast when I have a guest on there. Absolutely, a hunt that sticks out with me is my first trip to South Dakota. And it's a funny way that story came around. my friend Jeff Peterman that lives here in Twin Lake, Michigan, and I talked about that on last week's thing a little bit. I mentioned Jeff, and I think that trip to South Dakota. But when I got I had that down as my first out of state hunt. But I got to say, it was probably one of the most memorable. And the way it came about was also memorable. Jeff and I, we talked about going somewhere. We talked about just going down to Indiana because Indiana had, quail and pheasants back then. We always talked about it, but he was young family. I had a young family. We were getting a lot of time off. Well, a friend of Jeff's was invited to a hunt to go out to South Dakota. There was 4 guys originally on this hunt, and one guy dropped out. And one of the guys on that team was named Dave Stitt. Dave, if I remember this right, Dave invited Jeff to go on as to fill in the 4th person. And I was so jealous. I was like, you're so lucky you got an invite to go to South Dakota. Oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God. And then another guy, and this is not uncommon. Everybody has a great idea. We're all going to go on a trip because we send in a letter request, or we made a phone call to South Dakota and they sent us the map, and that's enough to say we're all going hunting. And I think that's about as far as that trip was ever really planned. But they did have that old plot book that the state would send you, and it had all the little areas you could hunt, and it had, it wasn't a county plot. It was a state hunting guide. And it was enough to get you excited and look at it and everything. Well, anyway, another guy dropped out, and then Jeff now asked Dave. He said, "Can Ron come?" And he said, "Yeah, we want to have 4 people. They're going to get there. That was their plan." Well, then another guy dropped out, and then I got Jerry Bazell to fill in. This is now a Ron, Jerry, and Jeff hunt with Dave. Dave backed out of the hunt, and this became my hunt because I always get I'm the mouth. I've always been the mouthpiece of the group, and when he dropped out, I had a young guy. He doesn't seem so young anymore because he's in his 50s. One of my good friends that worked for me for many, many years, Bruce Robertson, he worked for me, and I knew I could give him the time off, right? That I could manipulate. So I said, "You want to come to South Dakota and go hunting with me and Jerry and Jeff Peterman?" He was like, "Yeah." So now we've got this plot book, and it comes to fruition that they didn't know where they were going to go. They were literally going to drive out to South Dakota and start either knocking on doors or going to the little, waterfowl production areas that you could find. But I'll tell you, back in those days, all you had to do was road hunt South Dakota. Anyway, I had a friend named Greg Yerke at our church. When we first moved here, we joined a church and had the kids going to Sunday school, like my parents did to me. And anyway, he was from South Dakota, and I saw him one Sunday, prior to our trip, and I said, "What do you know about South Dakota pheasant hunting?" He looks at me and he's like, "Well, I know you don't have to hunt them very much. You just go out and look for them on the road." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, that's all we did." He said, once a year we'd go to one of our uncle's places and get a big group and push them and flank them and block them. But he said, he never owned a dog, but he said, there's lots of birds out there. And he said, "I'm sure you can hunt my mom and dad's property and my brother's property." And my eyes lit up. My eyes lit up. And so I made phone calls. He gave me their phone numbers. And so, I was in charge of that trip. And for a first-time out-of-town trip that you didn't know, there was nobody there to guide us or mentor us. It was probably one of the most successful trips we ever had, the most fun we ever had. When we found out you could drive around with a gun unloaded in your truck and 2 shells in your top pocket and jump out of a vehicle, once you put it in park, of course, jump out of a vehicle. If you saw birds in the ditch, it was legal to pursue those birds. If they flew out of the ditch, they were legal to shoot. And if they flew over the farmer's property, but they came from the ditch, they were also legal to shoot. You just had to leave your gun on the easement, the 66 feet of between fences, between the gravel road and the two fences. So you just give your gun to one of the guys or lean it on the post, climb in, and you go pick up your bird. And we just had so much fun. I mean, we went to a little bowling alley at one point in a little town that had like 4 lanes and the best burger you ever had. We went to the county. Greg's brother told us that we should go to the county building, which was in Tyndall, and get what was called the county plot book. And the county plot book gave you a really big picture of where you were hunting, and it gave you the landowners' names and their phone numbers in the back in the what would call it the directory in the back of the plot book. And that just opened up more doors because we would see places that looked good, or we would see a bunch of birds on some property that we couldn't trespass on. And we'd look where it is. We could find their house and or leave them a message. And I'm telling you, this was a part of South Dakota that to this day, most people don't go to. Nobody is going to go here to see record numbers of pheasants. But this was, again, over 30 years ago. I would tell you this spot was as good as the best spots are today in South Dakota. Just farming and the habitat, and it was just those boom years of birds. And it was just all I can tell you, it was the most fun. It was the worst motel we ever stayed in, which made it even more fun. Had one of the best little bars in town, had a great little diner. And in fact, the first year, we couldn't hunt till noon. They changed that, but it was a noon opener. And there was a place called Don the Clothier that was right on Main Street. There was the bakery that had also the restaurant. I mean, it was like stepping back in time. We never met a stranger. We helped one guy, older guy. He had a flat tire on the side of the road. And I'll never forget this. And I pull up alongside of him, and he's standing out there looking at his flat tire and walking. I think he was going to walk to town. He seemed like he was, he wasn't upset. And I said, I think Jerry was sitting next to me shotgun. He said, do you need some help? You want us to help you with the tire? He says, no, I'll get the tire fixed later. He said, I could use a ride to town, though. So we had my 4-door diesel, and we jumbled everybody around, and we gave him a ride into town, into Tyndall. And he said, this is my dumbass thing. The one thing before we left, I said, hey, I noticed you left your gun in the front seat of the truck. Do you want to grab it? And he looks at us. He's like, well, he knew we were from Michigan. We introduced ourselves. It was probably pretty obvious. We had more orange on than a catalog, and a shiny new truck that no farmer ever drove. But I said, do you want to grab your gun? He says, no one's going to touch my gun. I mean, where do you go where someone's going to leave? I remember it was a little 2-door red, like a Chevy S10 or some kind of the mini pickup trucks. I remember the window was down, and the shotgun had the barrel down on the passenger side floorboard, and the stock was up by the armrest of the driver's side. And I said, do you want to grab your gun? He goes, no one's going to touch my gun. We're like, wow, where are we? So, yeah, I would say most memorable right up there, and many more hunts thereafter in the same general area as we expanded our knowledge of South Dakota. So, yeah, that was can't say my favorite because I'm hoping that one hasn't come yet. But I will say it was it's a standout. It was definitely a standout in the years I've hunted. So I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, now we didn't get too many questions. There was a lot I didn't. There's a lot of them that were almost identical, but it's not like we got, onslaughted. So if you still listen to last week or you listen to this week and you're like, God, he didn't answer this. I'm not saying I answered everything that I've done in the last 40-some years, but if there is something you want to ask me, and if I get enough questions again, I'd be glad to do another one of these. I'll probably do it on a Zoom room or a link to the Zoom people. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, those of you who are know. Those of you who aren't don't know. Every month we have a Zoom room with the patrons of this show. People go to Patreon, patreon.com, and you type in Hunting Dog Podcast. It'll walk you right through it. And for $5 or $10 a month, whatever you want to spend, price of a beer, price of 2 beers, doesn't matter. You'll get extra content. You'll get an invite to the Zoom room. We've had this going on now probably since COVID, and there's some diehard regulars on this show, and I know you're probably listening to this episode too, and I know you probably heard most of these stories, but I tell you, there's been some friendships made. There's been some swapping of pins, so to speak, without virtual swapping of pins. A lot of people have hunted together, bumped into each other, stayed in touch with each other. You want to talk about a great community of people, anybody who comes on the Zoom room. And I know a lot of you got kids and you're in basketball at night or baseball practice, soccer practice, and I always get requests, can you record the Zoom rooms? They're usually chaotic. I don't use a raise your hand. Because it's just so informal. It's like having about 8 too many people in a house and we're all trying to talk. So it doesn't come out good to record it, and I think it would take something away from it if I had to hit the pause and have somebody raise their hand and ask a question. But it's a lot of fun. Probably one of the best things about being a patron, in my opinion, if I was a patron of someone else's show. And, of course, we have the history of my dogs that I put out once a month, and I'm about halfway through that, and that's been going on for about a year. And we also have segments of the Upland Institute on top of a very nice discount for patrons for the Upland Institute that is not published. Once you're a patron, you just write me a note, and I take care of my own. So I'm going to leave you with something that's on my website and something that I actually wrote this. I always say it a little different every time I say it, but you'll get the gist of it. And this is kind of like why I do this show, why I hunt. It's to remember. It's to remember the people and the dogs that I've known, the people and the dogs that have passed, and the people and the dogs that have yet to meet. And that might be you. Talk to you soon.